Hi guys. So this takes us to lesson 4D, and as you can see, well, I mean, I've been preparing for this moment. I keep saying this unit's more about grammar and stuff than any others. Well, this one's officially called Grammar and Punctuation. And just like with all of this other grammatical stuff that we're talking about, again, I know I'm repeating myself, but it's important to keep this in mind. Two reasons why we talk about it. One is being able to draw conclusions and evaluations and assessments of author's style. So that's why we want to have that grammatical lexicon at our disposal so that we can say, oh, well, the author does this here and that there and all this other stuff. And as a consequence of that, hopefully be in a situation where we can rhetorically analyze it and talk about how effective or ineffective those things are whenever we're doing any sort of rhetorical analysis. The other thing, of course, is, hey, let's just make sure we're writing well. And today dips a little bit more into that because, having taught for as many years as I have at this point in time, you definitely get the sense that a lot of students follow the pepper shaker school of commas, where you just shake them and hopefully they land up in the right place at some times. And we'll be talking about commas today, of course, as we discuss this punctuation business. So maybe this will help you to do it a little bit more consistently, a little bit more accurately as you're undertaking your writing. So, grammar and punctuation, that's what we're delving into today. I get it, not the most thrilling of notions, but it's also kind of unavoidable, in a course like this, which focuses so much on writing. And the other thing to keep in mind about this is all of this grammatical stuff is really just helping you to establish ethos. Because if you're lacking the accurate grammar, well, then you're lacking the ethos in all likelihood, with anything remotely like an educated, audience who is well read. So just something to keep in mind. All right. So let's get down to it then, if you don't mind, friends. Grammar and mechanics exist for precision and comprehensibility, but they can be manipulated and or ignored for effect. I've told you that, guys, before. I want you to know and be able to use all of the grammar rules perfectly. But at the same time, once you've shown me that you can do that, I want you to be able to break them in a way that's going to help your rhetoric. Because that's the beauty of rhetoric. Anything goes, really. If it can help to prove your point, there are fallacies that can be subverted. There are fouls that we will talk about that you really shouldn't undertake. But at the end of the day, it's the art of persuasion. And sometimes the art of persuasion doesn't play by the rules, okay? So, there's that. On that front, keep this in mind. We don't consider rhetoricians to make mistakes. They make purposeful decisions aimed at achieving a particular result. And that's what you're going to have to assume as you're taking a look at any text for the purpose of rhetorical analysis or otherwise. You're going to assume that everything that's there is exactly the way they wanted it. The follow-up question then is, why did they want it that way? If they broke a rule, why do they want it that way? If they have a sentence in that particular construction, why do they want it that way? If they have a word that has a connotation that is unpleasant, why did they want that word there? Things of that sort. That's what we do when we're doing rhetorical analysis, all right? So let's bring it down then to punctuation and start to get into the nitty-gritty there. I know you know what a comma is. I'm not, telling you anything brand spanking new with that in itself. Yes, it shows separations within a sentence. The question is, okay, when, where? Because a lot of people think, oh, well, I paused a little bit when I was speaking, so I need to put a comma there. That's great in elementary school, but it's not a very accurate method of inserting commas into a sentence, okay? So I'm actually going to skip ahead for a moment to explain this. These are our comma rules that we've got at our disposal, and I'll explain them to you in just a second. The big thing to keep in mind is the mnemonic that unites them all. And this is exactly the way that I was taught them in Grammar for English Teachers in college. Sinifac, okay? S-I-N-I-F-A-C. Not a word, unfortunately, but good enough for what we're doing in this case. A mnemonic device that stands for those, 7 rules that govern proper comma usage. So, series, introductory, non-essential, interrupter, fanboys, adjectives, and conventions. That's the way I remember them. That's, I think, the easiest way that I can communicate to you to remember them. So give it a whirl as we get into this. So those are your 7 comma rules. There are 7 main reasons why you're probably going to be using commas. Let's talk about them. Okay. So the first one, the S in Synofac, is series. This one probably you're pretty good at. Okay. Include commas between items in a series of 3 or more, always preceding and or some other coordinating conjunction as necessary. So I am a big proponent that you should have the Oxford comma or the Harvard comma, depending on what you want to call it, there. Before the word, the coordinating conjunction, I should say, in that series. But yeah, you put commas in a series of 3 or more. Okay. That's one that you're familiar with. Introductory, a little less so. And I'm actually, I take this rule to a further extent that I know some grammarians probably would. It says include commas after phrases or clauses that precede the subject of the sentence. The way a lot of teachers will teach that to you is if there's like more than 2 prepositional phrases, then you do it. Frankly, I feel like it should be there if there's only 1 prepositional phrase. So, at midnight, we went to the store. That would be a prepositional phrase before the subject of the sentence. I would expect you guys to be putting a comma there. Of course, that would also include subordinating clauses. So if you said, when the hour reached midnight, comma, we went to the store. I would expect that as well. So like I said, some grammarians may say, well, you need 2 prepositional phrases, in which case it would be when the hour struck midnight of the 13th, we went to the store. Okay, well, that some people might say that's the case, but frankly, I like them there when it's only 1 prepositional phrase. So if you've got stuff that precedes the subject of the sentence. Now, non-essential is a little bit tricky, and I know that's probably the one that gave me the most difficulty when I was first learning it myself. It says, include commas around information that, if omitted, would not change the meaning or comprehensibility of the sentence. Okay? So some cases in point. If I said something like, the dog that I bought was handsome. Okay, the dog that I bought was handsome. All right. That I bought is something that we have to ask ourselves, oh, should that be wrapped in commas or shouldn't that? And that's one of those situations where it is absolutely essential. And to demonstrate why that's absolutely essential, this is what you need to think about. It's an adjective that is actually describing which dog you bought. So we could be, as the listener, as the reader, whatever the case may be, asking ourselves, which dog did the person, is handsome? Is it the one that the person bought or the one that the person didn't buy? Well, specifically, it's the one that the person bought, okay? And so that makes it an essential piece of information. Okay, so what would actually be a non-essential piece of information then? Well, if you say something like, let's put it this way. I went to the store, which was crowded, okay? Me going to the store has no bearing on the fact that the store was crowded or not, okay? Now, if you said I was late because it was crowded, that makes a little bit more, that's a little bit more essential in that case, excuse me. But if you say I went to the store, which was crowded, me going to the store and the fact that the store was crowded are very non-essentially related, okay? The fact that the store was crowded is not dependent upon me going there necessarily. So you need to ask yourself, and like I said, there's a lot of tricky ins and outs with this one that make it very sort of confusing. You need to ask yourself, is there an essential piece of meaning in this particular phrase or expression or clause that if I chopped it out, it would change how someone interpreted what was going on? Not just less information, but change their interpretation of the information, okay? Interrupter. That's anything that interrupts. I know you're probably familiar with appositives, where you would say something like, my father, the police officer, lives in Delaware. Okay, something like that. The police officer, that's interrupting the sentence. Of course, there are lots of different ways things can be interrupting the sentence as well. And you can see how that might overlap a little bit with this concept of non-essential. I mean, an interrupter that's non-essential are essentially the same things. So it does overlap a little bit in that case. Fanboys, you should have some familiarity with from the last 2 lessons. Include a comma before coordinating conjunctions only when connecting two independent main clauses. So this is an important one because I get a lot of people who think that anytime they use a coordinating conjunction, they want to put a comma before it, okay? So if they put and, if they put but, if they put, anything of the sort, they think that comma needs to be there. That's not the case, okay? If you say something like, I bought 7 houses, but 3 garages. You don't need a comma there because you've only got a coordinating conjunction on the one side of it. The rest is just a continuation of that. Whereas if you said, I bought 7 houses and they have 3 garages, okay, now we've got a independent main clause on the left-hand side of that and on the right-hand side of that, so you would need that comma there, okay? So that's a tricky one because it sort of goes against our initial impulse. But keep that in mind. The only time you're going to be separating a coordinating conjunction with a comma next to it either is up there what we talked about before with a series, or if there's specifically going to be a complete sentence on the left-hand side and a complete sentence on the right-hand side. So adjectives is a semi-easy one. Well, there are 2 sort of caveats that get thrown into this. If you say, go home tonight and say that you learned today from your brilliant and witty, let me rephrase that, brilliant, witty English teacher, and that's a good example now that I think of it. You said brilliant, you said witty, those are 2 non-connected adjectives in that case, so you would put a comma after brilliant and before witty. So that hopefully that makes a lot of sense. Hopefully you would have done that automatically. You've got a list of adjectives all modifying the same noun. Now what makes that such a good one is there's kind of another adjective embedded within there as well. What kind of teacher? English teacher, okay? However, because English and teacher were sort of lumped together, we don't have to put a comma between English and the word that preceded it, witty. So there would just be a comma between intelligent, is that what I said? Brilliant, maybe I said? I forget. There's so many words to describe me. Brilliant, comma, witty, no comma, English teacher, because English and teacher go together, okay? And that happens sometimes. If you think about, if you're talking about a great white shark, well, those great white goes together. So if you're listing adjectives prior to the words great white, you wouldn't need a comma right preceding the great, okay? And then the last one is the one that's sort of the grab bag of other things, which is stuff that you generally can look up if and when you need to in any situation. So dates, where would you put a comma appropriately in a date or in an address if you're writing down an address? Or name suffixes like junior or senior or the third or the fourth or whatever the case may be. So that's conventions. It's sort of, like I said, the grab bag of other things. And those are your synofac. Okay, so hopefully those make some sense. And we will practice them a little bit in class and whatnot, and you can ask me questions, but make sure that you're asking yourself, okay, I think a comma belongs here. Is there a rule that matches up to it, or is it just me thinking to myself, well, I pause a little bit when I say it out loud, so I probably need it. No, that's not a rule. None of those rules say if you pause a little bit when you're speaking, you need to put a comma there, okay? So keep that in mind, guys. All right, let's go into the last couple then. Colon is a form of punctuation that often introduces an example. So the big thing to remember about colons are that they will have an independent main clause on only one side, usually the left. Now, of course, the exception to this rule is if you're writing down times on the clock. Okay, yeah, there's a colon as well. But I get a lot of people who misuse this. You want to keep in mind, colons are always going to have an independent main clause on only one side. Because if you've got an independent main clause on both sides, what you really want to be having is a semicolon. This is when a punctuation mark is put between 2 independent main clauses, often because they're sharing some kind of meaning, okay? That's really a key difference. Remember what I said up here, those colons are often saying that the independent main clause is introducing an example or a list of examples of things. Well, a semicolon has 2 complete sentences that are so closely related that you don't want to make them their own complete sentences. And so you're going to shove them together with a semicolon, possibly a connector word like however or therefore. But that's the difference between colons and semicolons. Okay, now that brings us down to dashes and hyphens, which are important because a lot of people think that they're exactly the same thing, and they are not the same thing. Big thing to keep in mind is that dashes are going to be generally longer than hyphens, and as a consequence, they're more divisive, whereas hyphens are more connective. So the dashes are so long because they're splitting things up, splitting two ideas up, but hyphens are so short because they're trying to connect things that don't really necessarily belong together in a traditional fashion. So what do we have here? Dashes are a form of punctuation that adds another thought to a sentence, like a bridge. Oh, look at this. This example is even embedded within the definition itself. It can also be used to interject a thought, an interruption really, into a sentence, okay? So that's what we're talking about with dashes. You can see those demonstrations right there. In order to make a dash, you should probably use what we would say are two hyphens in this case, just like you see right there, all right? On the flip side, the hyphens, again, would only be one of those, and that is it connects words together, making them into one combo word cluster. And there, once again, we've got a hyphenated expression directly in there. So again, remember, dashes are long because they're separating things. Hyphens are short because they're connecting things. And that's what you need to keep in mind, all right? Other basics that I'm sure that you're familiar with, but hey, they bear repeating. Parentheses, of course, we've talked about them to some degree before as we've gotten into MLA documentation and things of that sort. But they kind of do, in some cases, what a dash will do, in that they'll divide or insert things within the scope of a sentence. So a word, clause, or sentence inserted in it as an explanation or afterthought into a passage that is grammatically complete without it. I do find that some people have a tendency to overuse these, so just be wary of that. A lot of people put things in parentheses that, frankly, you just put them in the sentence, for crying out loud. I don't think that needs to be in parentheses. So, if you want to insert something as an explanation or an afterthought, put them in parentheses sometimes. Quotations, again, you should know a lot about quotations because we've talked about that as well. So just remember that each set of punctuation marks, whether single or double, used either to mark the beginning and end of a title or quoted passage, or to indicate that a word or phrase is regarded as slang or jargon. We haven't really talked about that before. Remember, or that if it's being discussed rather than used within the sentence. So, like if you're talking about the first word in every Edgar Allan Poe story, well then when you're mentioning those first words, you probably want to put them in quotation marks, not just because they're coming from an Edgar Allan Poe story, but because your sentence isn't crafted out of those first words. You're telling us, we're talking about the word, I'm not using the word in the sentence. Also, again, as it said, if it's used as slang, or if it's in any way sarcastic, that you're not supposed to take it literally, you'd be putting those in quotation marks as well. In addition to, of course, the norm, which is just quoting somebody, okay? And then, of course, don't forget your typical end marks, periods, question marks, exclamation points. I'm not going to waste your time on that. This is AP for 12th graders. Hopefully you can manage those by this point. And then the last thing is ellipsis, which is, in the fancy term, in case you're unfamiliar, with those series of dots that can signal something is missing from a quote or a source. I think we probably mentioned those before, but remember, ellipses can be valuable in certain situations and contexts, okay? Last thing we want to talk about today are just those three sentence structure issues that pop up. And again, as I've mentioned to you before, these are the rules, but when you're good enough and you know enough, I want you to break the rules if you see it as being rhetorically advantageous, okay? So just something to keep in mind. So these are the rules. Of course, maybe you've heard about the comma splice before. That's when a writer connects two independent or main clauses with only a comma. So remember, it would be okay if it was the comma plus a coordinating conjunction fanboys word, but you're lacking that fanboys word. Okay, so that would be problematic in that case. You can't just connect two main independent clauses with only a comma. You need to have that coordinating conjunction in there as well. Okay, now you could also connect those two independent main clauses with a semicolon if that's what you want to do. That's grammatically accurate, but you can't just do it with a comma. Okay, fragment. Again, is that incomplete sentence. This is going to omit a subject, a verb, or both. It may also possess both subject and verb, but have a subordinating conjunction while remaining unattached to an independent main clause. And I mentioned that to you before. So one of those sort of myths that I have to disabuse my students of that they gleaned back in elementary school that they have trouble breaking is that you can't start a sentence with because. A lot of people, even up until now, tell me, Mr. Halp, you can't start a sentence with because. I'm here to tell you, you absolutely can start a sentence with because. You just need to make sure that it's a complete sentence that started with because, okay? So if you say, because I went to bed early, that's not a complete sentence. That's a subordinating, it's got a subordinating conjunction to start it off. It's a subordinate dependent clause. It's not a complete sentence, okay? That's what those elementary school teachers were trying to stop you from doing. They were trying to stop you from having a sentence that went, because I went to bed early. However, if your sentence is, because I went to bed early, I woke up early as well, that is fine. Okay, you can absolutely start a sentence with because. You just need to make sure that it's a complete sentence. And this is sort of illustrating that to some degree as well. Remember, it has to have a subject, a verb, and a complete thought, and it's not going to have a complete thought if it has one of those subordinating conjunctions that require it to be attached to an independent main clause. And then lastly, of course, just the run-on sentence. This is one that's going to include two independent main clauses, and it's not going to have any punctuation, so it's not going to have a semicolon, it's not going to have a comma even to make it a comma splice. Maybe it will, and maybe it won't have coordinating conjunctions to attach them together. I don't know. But it's still going to be a run-on sentence. Too many independent main clauses shoved together. Now, the other thing I just want to note about that is I also get a lot of students who want to say to me, oh, this sentence, it takes up like half a page. It's a run-on. Something isn't a run-on just because it's really long. Okay, because, I mean, there are sentences that might go on for pages and pages and pages. But if the author knows what they're doing, and they know how to use the conjunctions appropriately, and they know how to use the punctuation appropriately, it still won't be a run-on. Okay, a run-on sentence implies that there are too many independent clauses without the right quantity of either punctuation or conjunctions embedded within them to prevent it from being grammatically accurate. So don't think just because a sentence is super long, it's automatically a run-on. That is absolutely not the case. Okay? So there's your punctuation and grammar crash course. Again, think about that in terms of perfecting your own writing and doing it more appropriately. But in addition to that, also be asking yourself, okay, when I'm doing a rhetorical analysis, when are they using these rules? How are they using these rules? How are they breaking these rules? Does their use and misuse of these rules accomplish some kind of rhetorical goal? That's what a rhetorical analysis actually is. Coming up with conclusions about those kinds of ideas. All right? So, that is that in a nutshell, guys. As always, come to class with any questions that you may happen to have in the near future. And I will see you shortly, friends.